Thank you all for joining the Australia 4.0 debate series, operating under the sponsorship of the Pearcey Foundation. The Pearcey Foundation acknowledges the Ngunnawal people and all the traditional custodians who belong to the lands where the Pearcey Foundation and you, our guests, meet, live and work. We acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders with us today and the elders past, present, and whose stories, traditions and living cultures in this country are a valuable resource, as are those of all who have come to make Australia their home. Together, we are Australia. Welcome to the Australia 4.0's debate series. My name is Ian Opperman. I'm the chair of the Australia 4 activity. And this series of debates we're about to commence is the culmination of more than 4 years of effort exploring the issues of the transition to net zero for the energy sector through the lens of data, digital and ICT, always with the consumer at the centre. This session is being recorded and will be available through the PSC website at a later stage. Australia needs a consistent approach to get to net zero, as the current debate is fractured, especially in the use of digital technology in our infrastructure. Working with partners such as Standards Australia, Engineers Australia, the Australian Computer Society, the CSIRO, universities, regulators and consumer representatives, Australia 4 has tried to create a constructive space for this important dialogue. The goal of Australia 4 has been to identify a set of commonly agreed challenges and proposed ways forward to address them from a digital and data perspective. The summary of the first phase, covering 2023 to 2024, was released in a communique in May 2024, and that's available from the PSC website. During 2024 and 2025, the Australia 4 series continued with workshops held in conjunction with partners who cared deeply about the transition to net zero, and we've addressed issues of putting consumer at the heart of the future grid, digitisation of the future grid, digital skills needed for future workforce, standards requirements, and other important elements of just how we get there. During each of these workshops, we've always thought to focus discussions around the lens of ICT, innovation, and the benefit to Australia. Today, we kick off the first of the 5 debates addressing key issues identified during those recent workshops. These debates will run each Friday for the next 4 weeks, starting, of course, with today. And please note, there will be a Slido QR code available to participate later on. Today's debate is entitled, "What Does Success Look Like?" and will be moderated by Terry Lampard. But first, let me please allow to introduce you to the chair of the PSC Foundation, Wayne Fitzsimmons. Wayne, over to you. Wayne, hopefully you can hear us. Hello, Wayne.
Wayne, you're on mute.
No event would be perfect without someone being on mute. Wayne, hopefully you can hear us.
Wayne is on mute. Needs to be turned
Okay.
on.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Wayne. Yep, perfect.
Right. Can you too many. Can you mute that one? Yeah, like that. So apologies. The Pearcey Foundation researches and celebrates our nation's past and present achievements in ICT. And today, as Ian mentioned, we're here to participate in our first of 5 sessions of our Australia 4 Summit. We established our Australian 4 debates just after COVID in 2022. The rationale was that the ICT sector needs to collaborate with the energy and power industries in managing this transition towards renewable energy sources. The challenge is that given consumers and industrial consumers particularly can be users, sources of energy supply, and have storage capability all concurrently and switchable in a few milliseconds, we have many new challenges from a regulatory and tariff perspective, let alone ensuring the consumer's agency in this transition is not lost. And how we do this is complex because to assist in the process, we've been holding, as Ian mentioned, a series of public discussions over the last few years to take a digital and data lens to these challenges. There are some serious data issues to be debated. Standards need to be developed. Consumer data rights need to be respected. then the security, resilience, reliability issues, etc. And we will get into those during the course of these 5 debates. Next steps. Today is the first in a series of these 5 Zoom discussions on 5 critical elements of this transition in which ICT must play a major role. Now back to Ian Opperman and on to the debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wayne. So without further ado, as Wayne mentioned, or as I mentioned, today's debate is entitled, What Does Success Look Like? And we're moderated by Terry Lampard. So Terry, over to you.
Right. Thanks, Ed, and welcome everyone to this session. I guess it comes as no surprise to anybody participating in today's debate and listening to it that very many of us have been trying to identify what a successful energy transition actually looks like, particularly for the end customers who interact with distribution system operators responsible for coordinating and controlling the two-way flow of energy, which is where we think we're headed with this energy transition, at least from a distribution perspective. But how will we know when we've got there? Or is it a hard target, or is it a gradual transition? Today's debate, which is the first of a series, is about whether a successful outcome for the energy transition can be framed as one of 2 scenarios. The first is a successful technology rollout enabled by rich data and the use of AI to create outcomes that automatically deliver the best outcomes for customers, or a second scenario where we have a transformation where customers have a primary role in defining the beneficial outcomes that technology and AI-enhanced data should provide to them. 2 quite different scenarios. So very briefly, we can describe these as either the passive customer technology-driven outcome or the active customer responsive technology outcome. Now, today, we're very fortunate to have 5 highly expert people who are keen to debate this topic. We're using Slido for questions and voting on the outcome of the debate. We'll let you all know how the vote turned out at the end of the session, but we'll have a vote before the session as well. So, to introduce our presenters, we have Ty Christopher, Director, Energy Futures at University of Wollongong, John Fletcher, Director of Digital Grid Futures at Uni of New South Wales, and they'll argue the case for a technology-driven outcome. Our other 2 debaters are Bill Lilly, CEO of Race for 2030, and Yolanda Strangers, Professor of Digital Technology and Society at Monash University. And Bill and Yolanda will argue the case for a customer-driven outcome. As I mentioned previously, we'll be using Slido for this event. So if we can get the Slido code up on the screen. That's great. So everybody should have their mobile phones at the ready. And of course, you all have smartphones. So please use the QR code on your screen and load Slido onto your phone. And I'll give you a little bit of time to do that. But what we would like you to do is before we commence the debate, I'd like you to vote yes or no on the proposition that you see on the screen, which we've summarised as success in transformation of the grid means service providers using AI to make all the decisions for the best outcome for each and every other Australian, rather than customers deciding what they need and want from service providers. So I'll give you the chance to cast your vote to either support or disagree with that proposal. And once we have some votes in, we'll post the results on the screen. Now, this is a lot more exciting than watching the election coverage on the ABC every 3 years.
Just waiting for a few more people to vote. We've only had about half of you vote so far. If you have any trouble accessing the Slido through the QR code, the URL link is in the chat. All right, Terry, I think we'll move on. Let's see the results.
Okay, thanks, Jordan. Okay, well, we have a fairly clear vote against the proposition. This means that the people arguing for the proposition have got their work cut out for them. So all the best, Ty and John. Now the votes are in. We'll repeat the vote at the end of today's session and see if anybody's changed their minds based on what they've heard over the next hour or so. Now, this should be a lot of fun. And the thing that I'm absolutely convinced about in these sessions is that nobody actually attends them to listen to me speak. So with that introduction, I'll hand over to Ty Christopher to present the first argument in favour of the proposition. Ty, the podium is yours.
Thank you, Terry. And a bit of a hill to climb there, I noticed. So thanks, everyone. Quick thumbs up if people can hear me. Is that okay? Rightio, doing the check there. Thank you. So thank you, audience. Look, the question before us here today is not whether choice is good, but it's whether every individual choice is capable of delivering the best collective outcome in a system that's as complex and as interconnected and essential as Australia's energy grid. Our argument on the affirmative side here is that true success in grid formation and transformation requires high-speed, AI-enabled and AI-enhanced service providers guided by professionals and experts using real-time data to make the important operational and strategic decisions on behalf of consumers rather than leaving each household to decide how and when to use and store all of their energy. So I've got 5 key points to go through in this very quick presentation. First of all, the grid is a system. It's not a marketplace of independent choices. The national electricity grid is not a supermarket that people can choose which cereal brand they want to buy from. It's a shared, synchronized network where wrong collective choices put together can cause instability, blackouts, or wasted renewable energy. Today's energy system is far more complex than it ever was. It's not about one-way power flow of electricity from coal plants to homes. It's dynamic with a web of rooftops, solar, electric vehicles, batteries, all sorts of dynamic appliances, each capable of both consuming and supplying power. The decisions of millions and millions of Australians now interact in real time in every millisecond of the day. Leaving every individual household to decide what they want, when to charge, when to sell, when to use energy, risks chaos overall. Only intelligent coordination, powered and enhanced by AI, can optimize across all of these nodes to maintain reliability, affordability, and decarbonisation. This is something that's already been recognised and is being piloted in New South Wales with the Urban Res here in the Illawarra. Point 2, professionals, not patients, run the system. We don't ask patients to run the hospital and to interpret their own x-rays. A pilot doesn't consult with all the passengers before takeoff. We trust professionals to apply their judgment, to use data, to use ethics in the service of the overall good. Likewise, with our grid, the future grid requires energy professionals with the right tools to interpret millions of points of data every second and make the best system-wide decisions. When to dispatch batteries, when to charge them, when to curtail demand, or when to stabilise frequency. Customers can still set their goals around comfort and cost and sustainability.
The doors will open on the right side of the tram. Change here for
Whoever's on public transport, could they mute? Just as doctors will use AI to recommend the most effective treatment, energy providers should use AI to prescribe the best operational path for Australia's benefit. Point 3, AI delivers fairness and efficiency beyond human capacity and agnostic of human bias. AI doesn't just automate, it optimizes. It can simultaneously minimize costs. There's a second person. Could you go on mute, please? For example, when AI systems can ensure that one suburb's solar generation peaks, another's EVs are charging or prioritised for charging, balancing that local use and maximising the efficiency overall of the grid and reducing costs to every single customer. Now, this can't be achieved by lots of individual human choices or even by one single human at a massive control panel with all of the knobs and dials and trying to get the set points right. Too many variables operating in too fast a time frame. By allowing AI intelligently programmed to make the day-to-day decisions, which battery discharges, which solar inverter throttles back, we can ensure the best system-wide outcomes. Point 4, empowering professionals still respects customer values. I know our opposition will probably say that this removes consumer choice, but in truth, it elevates it. Consumers already delegate complex decisions to the experts they trust. Doctors, lawyers, we don't all read legal codes ourselves before signing a contract. So the same applies to the electricity system. Australians should be able to express their values. They want low cost, they want zero emissions, but they shouldn't have to micromanage all of their own devices and all of their own energy contracts in order to achieve what at the end of the day is a straightforward set of requirements for most people. Last point, collective optimization is the only path to a stable and safe net zero grid. The transformation into a renewable net zero grid depends on coordination. Unmanaged consumer choice, all EVs charging at 6 p.m, all air conditioners switching on at once, leads to the very failures that we're trying to prevent here. If we want reliability, affordability, and sustainability, the energy trilemma, we cannot achieve it by treating every consumer as an island. We must operate as one intelligent, integrated system. So in brief conclusion, the future of the grid is not one of individual control panels and confusing individual energy dashboards. It's one of collective intelligence, where service providers, guided by the right type of tools, including AI, professional ethics, deliver the best outcomes for everyone, just like all of the other professionals in our public lives, health, pilots, engineers, and so on. To succeed in transforming our grid, to make it clean, reliable, and fair, we must let AI and professionals steer the system, not have millions of uncoordinated human impulses. It's not a loss of choice, it's a triumph of trust, expertise, and shared purpose. And that will give us the grid that we all want and need. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that, Ty. I must admit the engineer in me is drawn strongly towards the points that you've made there. And thanks very much for those points. Speaking against the proposition, we now have Yolanda Stringer. So Yolanda, the virtual podium is now yours for the next 5 minutes.
Thank you. So the affirmative team would have you believe that success in the transformation of grid means that service providers using AI will make all of the decisions for Australians, and that will provide the best way forward. And that's what we just heard then. We're here to argue in the negative team that that is neither possible nor desirable. And to make our case today, I'm going to introduce 3 points, and I'll be followed by my collaborator, Bill, who will continue our argument by highlighting some of the limitations of computing. So my 3 points are as follows. Firstly, you can't actually use AI to automate or control people. It simply is not possible. It's never been possible, and it won't be possible in the future. I am leading a project through the RACE CRC called Scenarios for Future Living, and for many years now we've been investigating how people will live with automation in the future and what forms of control and automation they will actually accept in relation to their large appliances that the energy sector would wish to control, things like air conditioners, hot water systems, EV chargers, pool pumps and home batteries. And in our most recent survey that we conducted on this earlier this year, we found that only 17% of households are happy for the smart appliances to be fully managed by a third party or fully managed autonomously on their own. What most households want, if they indeed want any automation at all, and I would say that 17% of households do not want any automation at this point in time, is that they want some form of manual override and control. Now, the difficulty with that comes in a perfectly optimized AI system when millions of households are potentially overriding the system at the same time. And we've explored that proposition in a future scenario set in the year of 2050, which has been based on the futures research we've been doing, the Emerging Technologies Research Lab, for the last 5 years. And in that scenario called hunkering down, what essentially happens is that a fully automated AI system does exist, and we have got to the point where people are using it to some extent, but they override that system prior to a significant event occurring where they believe that they need to have fully charged batteries and other systems in their home. So for instance, an extreme weather event that would affect a large proportion of the distribution network coming through could potentially mean we have hundreds of thousands of households overriding the automation of their systems. And that is not something, as much as the energy sector would like us to have that full control, it's not something that we can control. It's something we have to work with. And to work with that, we have to be talking to people, we have to be involving them and in these conversations in partnerships. So my second point is a little bit bigger picture, which is even if we could automate, which we've just shown you that we can't, people will always thwart the plans of the system, because the system is always subject to the changes of people and society. And of course, change is not a static thing. People are constantly changing how they live and their expectations for the future. We saw this, for instance, a number of decades ago when residential air conditioning load went beyond anticipated projections and started to cause some very significant problems for the system in terms of peak demand. And our research is showing that in the future, again, we're seeing other significant changes come through that could also potentially disrupt the system, potentially disrupt the automation and the AI, but even reach the limitations of the system that we have now. And so if we're not involving people in the transition, if we're just relying entirely on technology, some of these issues are going to pass us by. And the one that's, I think, very topical at the moment is the trend towards air purification in homes and the desire for households to move towards healthy, safe and comfortable air, which surpasses expectations for air conditioning and cooling, and also has significant implications during extreme weather. For instance, if we have bushfires or if we have hot weather events. It could potentially change the demand profile for air conditioning if purification becomes a central aspect of how people seek to cool their homes. For instance, we might see long stretches of cooling, closed windows and doors where otherwise they would have been open, and new peaks in demand, which will involve or need to involve collaboration with people to resolve, rather than relying entirely on system changes, which, even if possible, would be extremely expensive. And finally, we can achieve so much more in partnership with people. This is my third point. Why would we want to just rely on technology and automation? Even if it were possible, there is so much more we can do in collaboration with people. People have values that are aligned with the energy transition. They want health, they want safety, they want comfort, they want energy security, they also want their own home security. And many of these values can be mobilised to achieve the ambitions of the energy sector. It's not just about customer choices and bills and looking at kilowatts and kind of making decisions about price. There's an opportunity here with all of these household assets around home batteries, hot water, electric vehicles, etc., to be working with households to align the objectives of the energy system to make sure that we still maintain that reliable supply with people's expectations and values and desires to participate. Now, the opposition would have you believe that, consumers want to delegate their decisions to the system. Well, that's simply not true. And even if it were, people don't trust the system to do that. Trust comes through partnerships. Trust comes through collaboration. Trust comes through building relationships. It doesn't come from an automated system being applied on a mass population who are already extremely distrustful with the energy system. So we can't achieve the energy transition without people. I think that's extremely clear. This is not a message that AI and automation has no place in the system, but simply that we can't rely only on the system to achieve the ambitions that we have set for the transition. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Elena. That's also very convincing. So what I'll do now is hand over to Professor John Fletcher to speak once again for the affirmative side of the argument. So John, over to you.
Great, thank you, Terry, and I'm presuming you can all hear me. Ty started off with 5 points. Yolanda had 3. I'm going to go for 1. My 1 point is, and I'm kind of reframing the question a little bit. I'm removing AI and just saying, should the consumer be involved with the energy transition at all? And my answer to that is, no, I can't be bothered. The average household spends more on coffee from coffee shops than it spends on electrical energy. And when was the last time we voted a government out because the cost of a cup of coffee went up? We spend a lot of time discussing energy and how we might incentivize the consumer, to the detriment and to the time delay that it involves and it places in the system for actually getting things done. Designing an incentive scheme sometimes takes governments months and months and months. Think about the lost opportunity just by not having incentives. And what are we incentivizing? We're not incentivizing people at the lower end of the scale who have energy equity challenges. Many households can't afford PV, can't afford batteries. Many people live in apartments where it's just not feasible for them to take advantage of all these incentives that the government's offering. So to an extent, we're kind of pushing money into places where we don't really need to push it. We're not equitably distributing the benefits of decarbonising. And I think, when we look at the timescales that are involved in the transition, surely we've got to be trying to speed that up. There's enough tensions in the system as it is between whether the resources should be put in the distribution network or put in the transmission network. Is it utility scale? Is it residential scale? Is it community batteries? There's enough of a technical battle going on without then involving the consumer and giving the consumer choices. I just generally think the consumer really just wants to pay a bill and know it's getting some value from that. They're not necessarily interested in getting involved in all the software, the data, the networks, all the cybersecurity issues. Let's leave that to the professionals to sort out. As Ty quite rightly pointed out, the electrical energy network is a very complex beast. And the more I know about the network, the more I realize how complex it is, how many different layers there are. Just thinking about the technical aspects, it could take you a lifetime just to understand all these different layers, let alone placing on top of that the policy challenges, the regulation of the regulation that goes on. It's incredibly complex. And maybe we shouldn't be exposing the consumer to all of that kind of stuff, because it might just lead to more negative views on the energy industry in total, which we want to avoid, because let's face it, we need an energy network. We need an energy network that's equitable, that distributes the benefits of decarbonising as widely as possible. We want to avoid incentive schemes. We just want to get the job done. And the more we think and worry about it, the longer it's going to take. And I'm just going to end with that. I think I've still got 40 seconds, but I think you get the idea. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thanks very much for that, John. I think that sort of some of us would have some sympathy with that perspective as well, in responding to all of the struggles that go into actually managing an energy network in transition, and then inviting the customers to participate in all of the decisions as well. Doesn't assist rapid progress. But I'm sure that we're going to get a fairly strong pushback from Bill Lilly on all of this. He's guaranteed to be sort of fairly vicious about it, I think. So I'll be very interested to hear what you have to say, Bill. The floor is yours.
That'll be in the final rebuttal, I think. So just checking you can hear me. Yes, excellent. Sorry, I've got a visitor. Just 1 second. John, excellent. Thank you very much for the ruthless efficiency argument. Well done. I think thank you very much for the introduction. Today we have a proposition before us that success and transformation of the grid means service providers will use AI to make all the decisions for the best outcome for each and every user, rather than customers deciding what they need and want from service providers. I, for one, am very happy to join the resistance with my colleague, Professor Yolandi Stringers. My favourite appliances are purely resistive. I couldn't live without my toaster, without my kettle. And over my dead body, will I let some fandangled AI algorithm tell me how and when I should have my green tea? Given the nature of our gracious host, the Pearcey Foundation, and this audience, I'd like to reflect on transformation. This week, if you're a computer tragic like me, you've looked to order yourself an NVIDIA DGX Spark. This AI machine has a claimed performance of a petaflop in AI application. And here I think it's sort of illustrative to think through technology innovation. And not only that, driven by my friend and colleague, Elon. The first computer to reach a continuous petaflop was the IBM Roadrunner. Now, that's not an exact apples for apples comparison, but it's illustrative of the point I'd like to make. The Roadrunner was built in 2008. That's only 17 years ago. That system cost $100 million, $150 million in today's term. It took 560 meters squared of space. It was housed in 296 racks. And critically, given today's proposition, it drew 2.35 megawatts of electricity. Today, you and I can order a DGX. Well, we could if we lived in the US. The DGX costs $4,000. It has a petaflop of AI capability. It can be sent to you via the post. It's the size of a piece of banana bread, and it consumes 240 watts of power. That's 37,500 times cheaper and 1 million times less power use than the Roadrunner. Now, I think that's an extraordinary change. But critical to this debate, and I want to build on a little bit of history, I was in 2008, it's also when I began work on CSIRO's Intelligent Grid project. And I led this program that brought together a multidisciplinary team to develop a value proposition for CER, or what we would call DER in those days. And it was groundbreaking work. And I constantly copped flack from our data scientists and our electrical engineers who said the project had nothing to do with an intelligent grid. And why? Because it was just dealing with a bewildering array of topics: economics, environmental science, operations research, and God forbid, social science. Shout out to Yolandi here. Now, I know some other stuff, a little bit like power systems engineering, examination of CER and the NEM dispatch, etc. Now, this was a precursor for the CRC that I'm now privileged to run. And I returned home 13 years later, after going abroad, to run this program, because when I looked back at Australia and I looked back at this particular work, I realized that the same challenges existed today as they did when I left the country in 2011. And at its core, those challenges are developing a system with people at the center of decision making, in understanding how and why we use energy, in developing solutions that customers want, and doing so with minimal impact in their lives. This is what true success looks like. And while there's absolutely no doubt that technology will help us deal with our grid and its decarbonisation challenges, we will only do that, to steal a quote, when done for and with communities, not to them. And despite, the rapid change we've seen in all of these technologies and all of the uptake, we are still left at the fundamental core that humans and their decision-making and bringing them on the challenge is the hardest part of this journey, and it will be the critical part of success. So anyway, in conclusion, I would say I, for one, do not welcome our new digital overlords. Give me back my toaster. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bill. In the structure of today's session, we'll give both teams the opportunity to convince you that the other team is talking dangerous nonsense and should not be believed. So, Ty and John, you have the first option of a rebuttal against the arguments put forward by Yolanda and Bill.
Okay, I'll jump in if that's okay. And nothing personal against my learned and esteemed colleagues, but I've really got to start by actually thanking both Yolanda and Bill for so eloquently reinforcing and making our argument for us. First of all, if we look at the first point there, that you can't use AI to control people, we're not counting on controlling people. We're not looking to even control devices within homes. That's all subject to consumer choice. We're looking to control a grid, and we're looking to control a grid in a way that maximizes the benefits for everyone, including those individuals who lack the wherewithal financially or the desire to actually operate and control their energy footprint. It's not paternal. We're not saying we're removing customer choice. We're saying we're elevating it. We're allowing customers to make the choice that they want at the outcome level, and then let the experts work out how to achieve that outcome. If you like, the statement that I would use is most people sit on a spectrum. Some are super energy geeks, like many of us in the audience here, myself included, and others are at the hot water and cold beer level of interest in terms of their energy supply. They're resistive to change, as you quite rightly point out, Bill. So why not allow those people to operate their life in the way that they wish, stipulate their outcomes, and have the experts, aided by the right tools, actually deliver those outcomes safely and affordably for people. The second point being that people will always try and circumvent systems. We're certainly not proposing to establish Skynet and have it run the grid here. if you listen to the arguments that were made in both of our statements, it's about having intelligent operators and experts being allowed to do their job in running an efficient electricity grid for the benefit of all, and them having the right tools at their disposal. And certainly one of the things for all the research that's been quoted here, one of the other items of research that I would quote is there have been studies conducted for many, many years that clearly show that the intelligence of a large group of people, of a mob of people, is collectively far less than the intelligence of a small group of people or an individual. On the subject of partnership with consumers, could not agree more. But as my partner in crime here, John, was saying earlier, at what cost, and do we have time? It's all well and good to reach a kumbaya situation somewhere down the track where everybody feels wonderful about the power that they don't have because the lights have gone out due to a grid becoming completely unworkable and unstable due to the randomness of multi-million-dollar customer choices and a lack of intelligent grid operation from the experts that are always the best people who in every other part of our world and our lives we use and rely on to service with their knowledge, their experience, using the right tools, AI in this case. And to build on his very eloquent point that technology is advancing and advancing rapidly, that is an amazingly positive argument for us in the affirmative. So if technology is advancing so rapidly, why shouldn't we use it to optimize the operation of the grid for the benefit of all? And secondly, it's going to be unreasonable to expect that every consumer out there at a point in time is going to have access to or be able to afford the latest and greatest technology, the fastest whiz-bang computers, etc., etc. Surely that's a very valid argument for more centralized control, where those that need it have ongoing access to the latest tech, the latest information, the absolute fastest petagulagongs of processing power. I'm not sure whether that's an SI unit. I'm sure standards will pick me up on that. And by centralizing that and running it that way, it ensures that the best outcomes using the best tech are available to everyone, including those that might not be able to afford it. Over to you, John, in case I've missed something, please.
Thank you, Ty. I've only got one other comment to make. I was fearful about energy equity. Bill is fearful about his toast in the morning. I've rest my case. Thank you.
Thanks, Ty and John. Yolanda and Bill, over to you.
Shall I start, Bill?
Yeah.
Well, likewise, Ty and John, no hard feelings. But I have to say that you are living in an absolute fantasy land, and you seem to have forgotten that the whole purpose of the market and the energy system is to serve people. And if you're going to serve people, you can't just apply a system, a homogenous system, onto every single person and household and assume that that's going to deliver good outcomes. And I would challenge you, although you've got no time left, so you'll have to do it some other way, to give me an example of any system in history that has ever actually done that. The only way you deliver good outcomes for people is if they are central to the decision making and the processes and the systems that they're part of. Do we have time to engage people? I mean, really, Ty? Of course do we have time not to engage people? I mean, this transition has, everybody says it, the Pearcey Foundation, the whole central concept of this debate series is about putting people and consumers at the centre. It's the catch cry of the transition at the moment. We cannot afford not to engage people. I gave one example about automation being overridden, but there are so many examples live right now in the transition around what happens when we don't engage people properly. We have huge issues around the concept of social license, but also engagement in the transition, where people are not brought into conversations about major infrastructure decisions, transmission lines getting built, how renewable energy resources are going to get operated, the subsidies that are offered, everything, because every single decision and system change in this transition involves people. So I think the question is not, do we have time to engage them, but do we have time not to? Because if we don't, this transition will not be successful. And I think that's quite clear to the energy sector today. To John's point about people just can't be bothered, well, maybe that's because the energy industry hasn't framed things in a proposition, put things in a way to them that meets their values and expectations. But I mean, that's clearly a fallacy because, again, hundreds of thousands, millions of Australian households have embraced solar. They're now embracing batteries. They're getting EVs. They are being bothered to engage in this transition. They may not look at their bills and want to count their kilowatts, but engagement in the transition involves far more than those things. And it's very, obvious and apparent that people are engaging. Some aren't because they can't. And I think this is a really important point. And one that needs to be raised here in rebuttal to the opposition's argument around AI delivering equitable outcomes. I think that's a very concerning claim. AI so far is delivering very biased outcomes in nearly every domain that it's being applied. It's homogenising outcomes for particular groups of people. And there are huge equity concerns at the moment across a number of sectors around how AI is getting applied. So if we want to deliver equitable outcomes, once again, we have to come back to working with people. We have to not think that there is a one-size-fits-all system solution here, but rather that there will be different approaches needed in different situations. I think that's all my points. Bill, did you want to add something?
Yeah, thanks, Shivandi. And thank you very much, Ty and John. Ty, mate, I feel like we're in a therapy session and that you're just not feeling the love of the public. I just look and I feel a little sorry for you, but maybe go out and have a chat to these folk, get to understand them, and maybe rather than just bring him into the board collective. John, there's a part of me, mate, that thinks that AI hallucination's real. It feels like it's coming out, and and to Yolanda's point, and to make that point on equity, AI is particularly good. I think if you're a middle-aged white bloke, it does a great job at understanding you, providing value for you. If you're everyone else, maybe not. So, and the point I was making, and I'll, restate on, technology change. Technology has changed dramatically and impressively, but what's changed in the way that we deal with people in that 17 years? Very, very little. This is where the challenge is. This is where success will be. And I think I'll rest my case there. I hope that was harsher, Terry.
Harsh enough, I think, Bill. I'd like you all to join me in thanking the four presenters today for their thoughts, but now's the opportunity for the audience to put all four people on the spot. So we'll open the floor to questions, and I'll just note that all questions need to go in through a Slido link. Jordan, do we have any questions at the moment?
There's plenty.
Plenty, I believe. So I'll hand over to you to give voice to the questions. Thanks very much.
Sure. So one question that's been popular is, given that we're talking about making AI a principal feature of any future system, the question is, how much additional capacity will the system need to cater for all the data centers that are currently being mooted?
Okay, as a former power systems engineer, or still power systems engineer, I suppose technically, I'll grab the first one there. The short answer is a lot. Not to trivialize the question, however, we're talking about a pimple on a pumpkin, and the pumpkin is already happening. The use of AI across the world, the processing power associated with just social media even, we globally are fast approaching the point where TikTok and other social media uses more electricity than steel making, and which is a truly frightening statistic. And that's actually going to be happening no matter what. So the incremental processing power that would be required from these sorts of algorithms to optimize and run the grid is not really material in the overall equation. The reality is the grid is going to have to expand and find a way to cope with supplying all of these data centers. Or, and I show my age here, people are going to have to recognize that things like TikTok and a lot of social media are something between a waste of your life and a cesspool of people screaming at each other. And maybe are best avoided, in which case the electricity demand will reduce. But that's a statement more born of hope than any real fact. Leave it for others to decide on that.
Yeah, I don't want to help your argument, Ty, but the reality is that
it'd be therapeutic for me.
Yeah, part of the reason, you look at that technology change, and and even though the petaflops aren't the same, you're talking dense versus sparse matrices, etc. The reality is, it's a million times different outcome in power use. So yes, there's a whole lot more, but imagine if they were running on the older computers. And the reality is that space moves quickly. Efficiency gains in that are reductively, amazingly productive. Doesn't preclude the fact that, the growth in it is also amazingly large, and that's driven by and large, a whole bunch of value that people see. Now, whether Ty, you and I as old blokes see that value, that's a different question, but to the extent that society does, and I think this is the argument, that Yolandi puts forward and say, well, what do people want? What are their expectations? If that's their expectations, and then we need to learn how to deliver to them and deliver that efficiently, and to deliver that at least impact, in a global sense in terms of emissions.
One thing I would just say though on that, and shamelessly using this as a chance to unpack something, it is important to remember, statement that I've learned from hard-won experience is the customer is not always right. And a quote from Henry Ford, when he first invented and put out the Model T as affordable mass transport, and was asked, I'm paraphrasing, so bear with me. And he was asked, what did your customers say that they wanted in terms of the provision of the Model T? And Henry Ford answered, I didn't ask my customers. If I had asked them, they would have said they just wanted a faster horse.
I don't think that's aspirational.
All right, maybe we'll move on to the next question, which I think follows to some of that. Customer or consumer? Do you think that the distinction is a distinction important to make?
I can't do this.
Do you want to talk to that, Yolandi? I've certainly got strong opinions on it.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really important distinction. I'd actually go further and get out of all of those categories altogether. I mean, customer is obviously somebody who has a relationship to the market. Consumer is broader, again, is someone who is usually it's sort of framed in relation to not just consuming energy, but also someone who's participating in the energy transition in some way, so has solar or batteries, etc. It's often used to refer to that sort of person. But generally, as much as possible, we try to refer broadly to people and households, and frame the conversation a bit broader. I guess this is to your point, Ty. Yes, people don't necessarily know what's coming and what's possible. And there's a alignment piece that needs to happen between what people value in their lives and how energy fits into that. Not just energy values, but what do they care about? They care about, we've been talking to people recently, and it's all about safety and security at the moment, and energy fits into that. But it's not the way they don't start talking about energy. They talk about safety and security. So when we limit the category down to consumer or customer, we often just avoid that whole conversation with them. And likewise, from the flip side, the industry is framing conversations with people in a very kind of extractive sort of way, like what can we give you to do this and how can we make you do this in this particular way, when really what's happening is a huge transition that involves people's participation in new ways. And so we might not necessarily want to just go with what people want, but we might want to be taking them on a journey, a conversation, a partnership to explore how their values can align with what the energy transition needs to do and where it needs to get to. And that's a sort of different framing from certainly a customer relationship. And it's also different from saying we've just got to give customers or people everything that they want. That's not, the answer either, clearly, because we can't do that. It's impossible. So there's a meeting ground there that I think is where the fruitful space is for the energy transition.
And at the risk of completely undermining everything I've said up until this point in time, I'm actually in strong agreement with you on that point, Yolanda. The nature of this debate places us in a black and white, all of one or all of another discussion. I think one point that I make publicly time and again, and I'd be remiss were I not to reinforce it now, is the single largest change that's occurred in the energy industry globally since its inception is the uptake in volume of solar on homes here in Australia. And it's a very sobering point to recognise that change has occurred not through the actions of any of the multi-billion-dollar large energy company incumbents. It hasn't occurred through the actions of any of the varying between grossly incompetent and just asleep at the wheel energy regulators that we have here in Australia. It has occurred through the actions collectively of citizens. And ignoring that is something to ignore at your own peril. And I fear that I've just undermined my credibility in all that I said up until this point in time, but there we go.
Yeah, you certainly have, Ty, but I'm in strong agreement with you. I think the huge uplift in residential scale PV has been something that really marks Australia out from the rest of the world. And I think it's a fantastic result and does demonstrate what the consumer can do.
Yeah. I
guess my concern is the disenfranchised that can't take a benefit from that.
Correct.
So Ty, I'll support your proposition by saying back in the sorry days of doing the modelling, mate, the computers were telling us this is what will come. At that time, no one listened. So, the machine was ahead of the curve. So.
Okay. So moving on then perhaps to a more economic question. Do the debaters see a difference in pricing outcomes between their propositions? Which model will deliver cheaper electricity?
Oh, let me go first.
Yeah, I'll start it after you. Okay.
The only change that is going to result in lower prices for consumers is a change that allows consumers to buy, sell and trade their energy as much as possible outside the dysfunctional cartel system that is the wholesale market of the NEM. We've recently seen an entire review done on the NEM that spent 239 pages strategically avoiding talking about the real problem. The real problem is not the market or the market structure. The real problem is the very poor decision with hindsight to allow co-ownership of generation and retail, and then the market dominant position that's been established by 3 big gentailers and the excessive influence that they have on manipulating through their bidding processes on an hourly basis wholesale electricity prices. And then the thing that I admire most about Origin, AGL and Energy Australia, and that is their ability to keep a completely straight face when they pass on the prices that they have created in the wholesale market through their retail arm to consumers and say it's just wholesale price movement. Their ability to keep a straight face while they do that is epically impressive. So what's going to change here? No amount of AI is going to change that unless the AI is used to allow people to establish their own local energy trading systems and pools that are outside of the wholesale market and buy, sell and trade their energy away from the cartel system. That and therein lies leaning into people power and a successful future. Over to you, Bill, Yolanda, whatever you want.
Do you have something you want to add there, Yolanda?
Leave it to you, Bill.
Yeah, I was just going to make the point that, the obvious aspect around any system planning is that, the more you do that, the more you apply these things, the cheaper it could theoretically become. The issues then become, you can also use it to what Ty's talking about in the inverse of that if used incorrectly. But I think in terms of the overall proposition and the long-term aspect, and the one thing I was going to make a point on the rebuttal is that you can get good short-term gains, but if the customer's not part of that, they're not brought into that journey, the long-term economic outcomes will invariably be worse. And that could be that they just choose to do something separate from the system, for instance, because of a lack of trust, even though it might cost more. So, that's the broader context of I guess that outcome.
So let me follow that one with I'll combine a couple of the questions here. One is about what are the economic drivers for the consumers or customers? Is it to save, that is to get the best value out of our energy, or is it to profit, that is selling our energy to the grid? And so when we think about that, there is an argument going around that if families are paying, albeit with government subsidies, but if families are paying for all these batteries and EVs and other things, rooftop solar, then why shouldn't they get the lion's share of the benefits, even if it comes at a cost to the overall grid? And of course, a cost, as Ty was pointing out, to the profits of the big companies running the VPPs. So where's that economic motivation for the consumers or customers? And should they get the direct returns of the investments they're making in CER and DER?
Do they not, I guess I'm answering a question of the question, but if you install your own battery, then you're getting the benefit directly from self-consuming to a large extent. And that's being subsidized by the taxpayer.
Yeah, I'd observe this unpacks the issue of equity. And there are two, in my mind, look, it's a complex issue, but I'll put it into two categories for the sake of making a clear point. On the one hand, the inequity, the very sad inequity story that exists now in the Australian grid is because of the revenue cap-based regulation of the monopolies, the transmission and distribution network providers, poles and wires, if you will. What it means is the more and more people who can afford to will put solar on their homes, and yes, batteries as well, and transact less and less of their energy through the grid and more of it within their own home system. That effectively, under a revenue cap regulation, burdens more and more the have-nots, the people who can't access solar, who don't have a roof, who are renters, social housing, apartments, disproportionately with burdening the recovery costs of the grid under that revenue cap-based regulation. So that's layer one of inequity that exists at the moment. Layer two of inequity is even for those individuals who have purchased solar and batteries and whatever on their homes, their returns are subject to the whims of rule makers and so-called markets. I've ranted enough about them. I say so-called markets, they're not really. Whereas any capital that's invested, in particular by the large monopoly businesses, is subject to guaranteed rates of return, which is the inequity that my friend and colleague John here was highlighting as well. So what all of this really starts to come down to is there's a foundation shaking piece of thinking here that says the hole in the ground that was dug into which we poured the foundations of the NEM as these structures around there's monopolies and there's markets and there the twain shall meet and we'll structure all the industry accordingly. That was all well and good, but the problem is in the 35 years since that occurred, technology has now created a lot of things that operate equally as both market and so-called monopoly-based services. And this inequity that is now, these inequities that occur between haves and have-nots on the energy side, and between individual citizens and large multi-billion-dollar corporations are both material issues that really need to be wrestled to the ground. And quite frankly, again, sorry, I'm reinforcing the opposition's point here, to Yolanda's point as well. I think if more people fully understood the degree of these issues, there'd be a lot more burning torches and pitchforks appearing down in Canberra than there are at the moment. Over to my colleagues, please.
I'd just like to add to this as well. I mean, I think one of the, I won't comment directly on the economic and pricing and stuff. I have colleagues at Monash University who are doing some very detailed work on this at the moment. But in the work we've been doing, we've really been trying to explore other modes of engagement. I think one of the perils again of the energy transition and the current thinking is that we limit ourselves to thinking that the only form of engagement for people, for households, is through the market, is through incentivizing them, paying them, giving them rebates and subsidies and what have you. Of course, they are important, but they are not the only reason and the only form of engagement. And it's often in combination with other things that people care about that we see significant change. So, for instance, we learned a number of years ago that households, when they told us that they wanted to go off the grid, what they really meant was they didn't want to disconnect from the grid, but they wanted to put battery and solar on their home so that they had energy independence, but still a kind of lifeline to the grid. And having that energy independence, having that security came from so many reasons as to why they wanted that. Often it was because they weren't particularly happy with the energy system and their energy providers, and they wanted some kind of disconnection from that. But it may also have been around wanting better energy security, may have been environmental, so many different reasons. And that was a really kind of key motivator for them. The money was kind of a nice add-on, if you like. I think the other, just one other example actually, and this has come from recent field work. It's a new one that I hadn't come across before, but a household we visited, we talked about sharing energy. We often talk about, schemes to share excess solar. We call it sharing because it's a very, it's a more appealing concept than selling. Again, that market being a limiter in terms of how we think about these things, sharing energy with their community. And this is a really appealing and attractive proposition to them because they wanted to build community cohesion. And the reason they wanted to do that was because of crime. And if anyone's seen the headlines in Melbourne today, you'll know that crime is very much front and centre in this community at the moment, but it also is more broadly across Australia. And so as people in their neighbourhoods become more concerned about security, they're looking for ways in which to provide community cohesion. And energy transition could actually be part of that. So this is what I mean about we've got to sort of get a little bit out of our own heads in terms of how we think about engagement and the dominant ways that the energy sector has sought to motivate and involve people. And yes, I'm not saying they're irrelevant, but there are other ways of engaging people in this transition and aligning what the sector wants to achieve with what people value and want as well.
Okay. So again, I'm going to try and combine a few of these things. Following up on what you were just saying, I guess there remains an issue that you've all mentioned about inequity. And so rooftop solar and batteries sound great, but there's an increasingly large proportion of Australians who don't have the option for that. They can't afford it, or they don't live in an environment where they control that ability. So there's it can't be the basis for the shape of the future grid on its own and for the interaction between the grid and the consumer or customer. So how do we look to address, how do we, when we talk about what success looks like, how do we look for success in addressing the inequities? Is it through regulation? Is it through legislation? Is it through AI? Is it through AI in the grid or AI in the home? So that's sort of several questions combined there, but hopefully it gives you something to address.
Just waiting to see who wants to start.
I was going to say, do we warm up by solving world hunger on that one?
Well, it is hard, but
just saying.
Yeah, The movement, obviously you talk to the solar, the battery, to those who can afford it. And I think Ty summed up many of the structural issues that sit behind that. Doesn't preclude the fact that that's a good thing to do. When you look at these and you look at a whole of system, you've got to say, well, what's the right balance for all people? And what are the circumstances that are there? I personally, this is my office, it's this wide, and every one of my control switches is within hand reach for my apartment. There's none of those solutions going to do me any good. But, I think, I will be looking to get things that come from the grid that are going to be from a different source, or they could be from a community source like the Illawarra Reds that Ty was talking to before, that are providing me the same essential services. So ultimately, it's down to the services that you want. I think Yolandi talks a lot to the, understanding what people want from those services, what other things they desire. And then it's up to, and, not that I want to agree with Ty here, but, for the good engineers and, scientists there to come up with those solutions that are the best options that balance the system properly and to do it at the least cost and least impact for everyone, but take those broader sets of nuanced understandings that, Yolandi talks to and builds and understands. So for me, that's the issue there.
I knew I'd get a concession out of you if we just prosecuted things.
just waited long enough.
There,
yeah.
Bill, no worries. Look, what is the solution? There's not a silver bullet for this, and I'll sort of right back at you, and perhaps more to Yolanda as well. I think depending on who you are, the national electricity market is either an amazing success or a catastrophic failure. If you're a multi-billion-dollar company who makes multi-billion-dollar profits, who only exists because of words that have been written on a page in the national electricity rules, and the thousands of people that you employ, and the thousands of people that are employed by all the regulators to make sure you follow the rules, then the NEM is a spectacular success, because look at all the money that it's made. If, however, you're an end-use consumer who's experienced above CPI price rises in your electricity bills from the day the NEM was created until this day now, you might want to have some reasonable questions about how successful the NEM has actually been for you as a consumer. I know I do. So the solution to this as an engineer for me is quite simple. Blow that crap up and start again with something that is customer centric. Politically, practically, economically, that has no chance in terms of a way forward. So therefore, my contention is, and this is opinion now, this isn't backed by great rigor, but it's certainly backed by a lot of conversations I have very well connected with a lot of people, and that is trying to reform the existing market to address and solve these issues while ever it's dominated by the big incumbents who have caused the issues is a fool's errand. And the best solution is for consumers to continue the momentum behind their two-fingered salute to the establishment, which is a lot of what's driven solar and now batteries, and to start establishing their own community cooperatives to share, love the word better than buy, sell and trade, share energy locally and more equitably amongst haves and have-nots. The only way I see to beat the capitalist model is to use its powers against it. And that's an opinion.
Okay, so I want to bring us back to the AI topic. So if we look to a successful transformation where AI is involved, I think everyone is accepting that at some level. It could be that it's going to orchestrate all of the resources from the grid size to ensure stability and availability. But there's also the challenge of customers and consumers retaining their agency and being protected from abuse. One aspect of that, of course, particularly to some of the points Yolanda's been making, is that the AI being used in these systems could be trained on the values and requirements of the Australian consumers in the energy system and not just drawn from some overseas source. Yeah. So the question, I guess, here is around, if we're going to use AI, are we going to use it just to dominate, or are we going to use it to enable? And what are the ways from those two perspectives of driving an AI-driven network that tells us how to make it all work, or having AI-enabled households that determine the best option for the household? Where are you going to draw the balance with the AI and make sure it all works together?
Newsflash, it's already happening. At least one of the, in fact, two of the three New South Wales distributors are already using AI-based systems trained to deliver balanced outcomes across broad consumer categories to operate things that in the consumer-facing sense are, for example, the technical term is dynamic operating envelopes, but the reality is instead of saying you can't export more or have more than a 5 kilowatt per phase solar output, saying you can put as much solar as you want on your premise, but the condition is on a small number of hours, on a small number of days per year, that may need to be actively wound back in order to allow grid stability to occur. But for the majority of the time, go your hardest. That's in a practical sense an example of dynamic operating envelopes. And what I can say is AI is already being used for that. How do I know this? Looking at my background here, that building there houses a company called GridSight AI, who are the service provider to two of the New South Wales distributors who are running this behind the scenes. And it's delivering quite sound results in terms of both its technical outcomes as well as, for want of a better word, I'd say its benevolence at the moment. So I think that's a good point. AI can be as malicious or not as you program it to be.
Yeah. So again, I don't want to support your side of the fence, but it's
We're turning into a violent agreement here, aren't we?
Yeah, I know. We tried to avoid this earlier for all you participants. It was a struggle to find the line to draw to depart. But you're absolutely right. I mean, it sits there. AI as a collective includes, standard OR. So you've been running the NIM off it for years.
Yeah.
Where we've moved to and towards some of the edge applications, obviously it won't work without actually training with the if you think about something in the HEM space and satisfying a local demand, it's inherent on having to build that training and understanding of the household, the individual. Otherwise, it'll be a complete and utter failure. So, that's how they're built. That's why it should be there, and that's what it'll do if it works effectively. The reality is, people will need to choose how much they want to be engaged with that, how much they want to trust it, how much they want to let that happen, or whether they want to do anything like myself, where I can literally just hit my own switch next to me.
Don't let your mate who you had at the start of your speech have any say in it. That's a good start.
Yeah, exactly. So, but that, and I think even down to privacy relationships. I mean, you talk to agency there, but ultimately it's a privacy question on data.
Yeah.
There are ways around things like split federated learning models, for instance, to be able to deal with those type of issues that may not be as computationally useful, but will deal with the privacy issue. So, there's a research community there, ready to tackle some of those challenges and to do so in the most equitable fashion. But I think the reason I brought in the secret weapon of Yolandi here today is, you have to bring the consumer as part of that. You have to understand the rich nuance of people and the understanding of it. So,
don't want to arrive at the end of this journey driving an empty bus.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the comments rather than questions that has come in is Phil's talk about the fact that he uses Amber, who is a retailer that sells electricity at wholesale rates to the customer. And as he said, he's quite happy for Amber to have the permission to charge and discharge his battery to maximize the investment he made in that solar and battery system. And it works very well. So I guess that's just another example of what you're saying. It's already happening.
It is, and it's one of the challenges you face in the public debate in all of this. I get asked by citizens quite often, a VPP is a good thing or a bad thing. And at the moment in the market, VPP offerings are a textbook case of caveat emptor. There are a series of VPP offerings out there in the market that are truly horrendous for a consumer's perspective. They basically give nothing of the benefits to consumers. There are others out there that are far more equitable, again, that word, and balanced very much. You know, the provider is delivering a service and they deserve to be recompensed for that, but there are also significant financial rewards here that deservedly should be shared by the entity, the individual citizen who's investing the capital. So the bottom line of that is, unsurprisingly, the worst VPP offerings are the ones offered by Origin, AGL and Energy Australia. What a coincidence. The big energy companies who are manipulating the market and screwing everyone have VPP offerings that screw everyone. Who'd have thought that would ever happen?
Before going on that rant, Ty, I think the one thing about AI, again, I'm supporting your side of the fence. You know, there'd be
you can help with this.
You can imagine a world where it's not hard to get an AI comparison engine to look at what you're doing, understand your outcomes, and be able to actually suggest whether or not you are doing something good or not.
Exactly.
And that would be an excellent addition to a suite of tools to make a customer maybe potentially trust the system more.
Yeah.
So that's things that could be done.
Yeah, and so the answer is, a VPP is good or bad. Some are very good, some are not. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think Terry, maybe we can start to wrap up.
Okay, thanks, Jordan. I'm just reflecting on some history here. When I helped New South Wales to commission the first grid-connected solar array in the Southern Hemisphere in the early 1990s, I had no idea how much trouble I was going to cause. And that project was carried out very much against the wish of a very significant and influential part of the engineering wing of the organisation I was working for as well. Maybe they were right, but I don't think so. We're going to run another quick 1-minute Slido poll. Jordan, if you can put the original proposition back up on the screen, and if everybody would like to replace their votes on this proposition, we'll see if the needle has shifted at all.
Just while that's happening, Terry, I've just brought myself off mic. It's Tim Ryan. Just wondering how much we're led astray by people, particularly the VPP approach, on trying to say, I'm going to make you some money and I'm going to give you some money, but I'm going to keep most of it for myself. And the problems around that, like we think about how our road rules work. We all sort of behave pretty uniformly, and we don't get paid to make sure we don't run through red lights. We pay if we go through them. So the biggest change in the power system is actually we've now got buffers, and those buffers mean we've got the ability to fill up a battery, fill up our vehicle to home, whatever, and manage things to lower our cost, which comes naturally. And I just wonder if we actually manage to tell everybody, you do things to save, and that actually makes the whole system cheaper, whether they want to do that, but that's completely antithetical to the traditional business we've got.
Yeah, I guess another reflection is that some of us thought that the creation of a full retail contestability for the domestic energy market was a mistake, and I don't think any of the events over the last 20-odd years have proved me wrong.
I'm showing my age here, but I was actually on the team the lead team who worked for the New Zealand government and did the investigation into the Auckland power failures that occurred, or power failure that occurred in the very late part of the 1990s. And one of the pieces of evidence that I've carried with me ever since was when they finally realised that they were facing a potential collapse of the whole energy grid supplying the largest city in their nation. The Mercury, as it was at the time, the distributor there, put out a call across the city to say, we're in dire situations, can everyone please help by curtailing your electricity use and turning off everything that you can? And I've seen the traces, and for the following hour after that call went out, electricity demand climbed rapidly.
Everybody confiscated capacity.
Everybody thought, oh, it's in scarce supply, I'll just grab mine quickly and get my stuff done. So it is important to remember that people don't always act rationally for the collective good. They sometimes just look after themselves, and you get enough of that going on and you know where you are. Hey, we moved the needle. Well done.
There you go.
Well, okay, thank you everyone that's submitted a vote. I might hand, and thanks once again to the presenters. It's been a great panel discussion and thought-provoking questions and responses. I've found that extremely enjoyable. I might hand back to Ian.
Thank you, Terry. That was indeed fascinating. And it's interesting, the difference between opening up with a question, which seems pretty simplistic, but then getting into the issues of it, the elements of it, the nuances of it, really what starts to come out. And I think this was a great first debate, the first of 5. They take place every Friday at the same time for the next 4 weeks. And I'd encourage you to sign up to the series and come along and join them. I think this was a really interesting perspective. And I think even that last conversation at the end just reminds us all that the consumer's behavior ultimately is at the heart of not only what we're trying to achieve, what trying to ensure that the consumer actually is the one who's served out of the transition to the net zero, whilst maintaining stability, whilst maintaining integrity, whilst maintaining all the things that must be true for an energy network to be resilient and robust. I'd also like to thank Terry. Thank you very much for your moderating. Thank you to our debaters. Thank you for everyone who attended. And I just encourage you to register for debate number 2 if you haven't registered for the series, Creating the Consumer's Grid, which will take place on Friday, the 24th of October at 12:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time. Thank you all very much for joining. Thank you for your active engagement. Thank you for getting stuck into the Slido, and we'll see you next time. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Dan. Pleasure.